Good afternoon and welcome to the Little Rock Regional Chamber of Commerce in Little Rock, Arkansas, where we're so thankful to have the opportunity to be joined by a wonderful group of dignitaries today to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Mcclellan Kerr Arkansas River Navigation System, a system that means so much to us from an economic development standpoint, but especially so much to those around the country and around the world who actually utilize it as well. It is my pleasure today to welcome to the podium Senator Clark Tucker. Senator Tucker is Arkansas State Senator, a friend of the business community, a friend of business here in Little Rock and Central Arkansas. Obviously has a great connection with one of our other speakers today. The Tucker family, for those of you that aren't from the Little Rock area, is extremely well known in Little Rock and in Arkansas for their work here. Obviously, Senator Tucker himself is taking that mantle of family leadership and moving forward with it in a very strong and productive manner. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome with me Senator Clark Tucker.
Thank you very much, Jay. It's wonderful to be here today to take part in the celebration of the Mcclellan Kerr Arkansas River Navigation System, which, as Jay said, has meant so much to Central Arkansas and really the entire country. We're very lucky today to have an esteemed group of panelists. We have Little Rock Port Authority Director Brian Day, Little Rock Mayor Frank Scott Jr., and then we also have the Secretary of the United States Department of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg. So before we get to the panelists, I want to give an opportunity to our Governor, Asa Hutchinson, to make a few remarks. Governor Hutchinson's the 46th governor of Arkansas. For the last several decades, he's had a practice in both law and public service. He was appointed by President Reagan as United States Attorney for the Western District of Arkansas, at the time the youngest United States Attorney in the entire country. He was elected to Congress in 1996, where he served 3 terms before he was appointed by President Bush to head up the Drug Enforcement Administration, and then appointed Deputy Secretary of the newly created Department of Homeland Security. He was elected governor of the great state of Arkansas in 2014. He's currently serving in his 2nd term. Throughout his time as governor, he's helped champion the infrastructure needs in the state, certainly. And with that, I'll turn it over to Governor Asa Hutchinson. Thank you, Governor, so much for being here today.
Thank you, Senator Tucker, and I am grateful for your leadership on the issues of infrastructure as well, and for convening this distinguished panel today to celebrate the 50-year anniversary of the Mcclellan Kerr Arkansas River Navigation System. And I'm pleased that the panelists do include our esteemed Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, and I want to express appreciation to the Secretary for a call that I had with him probably about a week ago, in which we talked about the repair work that's necessary on the I-40 bridge between Arkansas and Tennessee. That's such a vital link for our country, and appreciate his attention to that. He on the panel, as well as Brian Day, the CEO of the Port Authority here in Little Rock, that does a great job in leading that incredible asset for our state. And then, of course, we're delighted to have the mayor. Mayor Frank Scott has been a good partner in economic development here in the state, and obviously here in Little Rock, and I appreciate his partnership. And Jay, thank you for your leadership at the Chamber of Commerce as well. I see Barry Hyde, our county judge here. And so all of these are great partners in the river navigation system and the development in Central Arkansas. I wanted to mention a couple of things as we start off with this panel. And first of all, if you look back a little bit on the history of the Mcclellan Kerr Arkansas River Navigation System, it started with a study in 1943. And then in 1956, which is 13 years later, they got funding for it. And then 15 years after that, it received its dedication with President Nixon, president at the port of Catoosa. And so 13 years to develop funding, 15 years to do the project. And that shows, as we celebrate this anniversary, as to how long major infrastructure projects take in our country, both in the planning stage and the development stage. But what a great asset for Arkansas and for the multi-state area that benefits from this navigation system. Of course, it's multifaceted in purpose, from water supply to hydropower to flood control, and on down the list of purposes and benefits that we've received from this navigation system. The Little Rock Port Authority, of course, is a key part in managing one of the most beautiful and important assets along this navigation system. Whenever you look at 2,640 acres, a slackwater harbor, 2 barge facilities that's available, rail access, all of those benefits that come from location at the port means that every time that I, as governor, or our Secretary of Commerce, or the mayor works to recruit an industry, no matter where they're fascinated, they generally say, well, let's take a look at the port. It's the port that gives that access from the river to rail that brings such benefit. It's such a great asset in recruiting industry to Arkansas. And then finally, if I might, I want to talk about the future of the port and future, more importantly, of the navigation system. And there's a couple things that we have to look at that I hope the panelists will discuss today. It was created as a 9-foot channel. When I was in Congress, and I was in Congress 20 years ago, we did a study to move that to a 12-foot channel that deepens it, increases access. Well, that was 20 years ago, and we've had to renew that study to make it current. And so Arkansas and Oklahoma together are partnering to renew the study of increasing that channel to 12 feet in depth. That's an important initiative, and we hope that that can be carried out and can become a reality down the road. The levee system itself, not only have we looked at a pandemic, but now we've had to look even before that at flooding along the Arkansas River, and it showed the vulnerability of our levee system, that we are investing from Arkansas dollars to federal dollars in repairing that system. It is critical that our navigation system does not create a barrier to the farmland and to the development along the river. And then, of course, the lock and dam maintenance itself. All of these are funding issues and points up the need, as perhaps the Secretary will make that point as well, that we do need to have infrastructure investment here across our country. And I hope that Congress can reach a resolution of that we can continue that investment in infrastructure. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to greet everyone, to extend my congratulations, and also welcome the panelists, and grateful for their conversation that they will pursue. Thank you, and I hope that we can continue the success of this river navigation system that's so critical to my state, but also to the entire nation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Governor, and I want to pay you a particular compliment, not just for your remarks, but for the success that you had in pronouncing the last name of the first guest that I'll introduce today, Secretary Buttigieg. And what we'll do now is I'll introduce each of the panelists, and they'll each have an opportunity for a few minutes of opening remarks. But Secretary Buttigieg grew up in South Bend, Indiana. He attended Harvard College before he was awarded a Rhodes Scholarship and went to study in Oxford for a few years. He returned home to the Midwest and worked in the private sector before he was elected mayor of his hometown, South Bend, in 2011. At the time, he was the youngest elected mayor in the United States of a city or town of more than 100,000 people. Once he became mayor, everything you want to see go up, like wages and job growth, went up, and everything you want to see go down, like poverty and unemployment, went down. Just as important as that, he made a deliberate effort to make sure that everyone in that community was included and a welcome part of South Bend as they move toward the future. In 2019, he did not run for re-election of mayor, but instead launched a campaign for the United States presidency. After having that historic campaign, he became part of the Biden-Harris campaign team in 2020 before President Biden nominated him to serve as the United States Department of Transportation Secretary, where he was confirmed, I might add, by 86 votes. And given the nature of the partisanship in Washington right now, that's really a testament to him and his vision for the United States, particularly as it comes to transportation and infrastructure as we move forward. The only blemish on his resume that I'm aware of is when he was in college, he did occasionally hang out with some questionable characters, but I think he's moved beyond that at this point in time, so long as they don't have too many bad videos or pictures. Thankfully, there were no camera phones in existence at the time. But with that, I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much, Clark. Senator Tucker, I ought to say, somebody whose intellect and character and conscience I have admired for 2 decades now, and I know the people of Arkansas are so fortunate to have you serving them. I'm thankful for the invitation to join you today. As will, I'm sure, be no surprise to folks gathered here, Senator Tucker was something of an ambassador of Arkansas, even as a college student, trying to get us all to come over to Little Rock. And so even being able to do it virtually today is something I'm thankful for. Governor, thank you for your remarks, and thanks to you likewise for our recent conversation on how to support progress on the I-40 bridge in another part of the state. I learned a lot from my visit, enjoyed getting to know Commissioner Moore and his colleagues, and really appreciate the way that your department has spared no effort in making sure that everything happens that needs to support the impacted communities and to work toward getting that critical piece of infrastructure back up and running. And we continue to appreciate being able to work with you and your administration on that. Mayor Scott, I am always pleased to be in the company of a fellow mayor, and so appreciate everything that you're doing for your community. And Director Day, I'm looking forward to our discussion, and congratulations on this great anniversary. It is a real pleasure to be able to join so many supporters of the U.S. maritime industry to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Mcclellan Kerr Arkansas River Navigation System. I know 50 years ago you had a sitting U.S. president in your company, but hopefully a Secretary of Transportation will do the trick this time around as you acknowledge half a century of impact from this extraordinary resource. Our inland and coastwise transportation system employs more than 50,000 American workers, both afloat and ashore. And one of the crown jewels of that system is MCARS, that generates well over $1 billion in economic value in Arkansas and Oklahoma and throughout the region, and helps support in some way the transportation needs of a dozen states. As the governor said, it takes a long time to bring together a major piece of infrastructure like this. But what happened was that people 50 years ago, and on the road to that great day 50 years ago, people made a bet that investing in infrastructure would open up new economic possibility for an entire region for decades to come. And that's what we've seen. To this day, a world that has changed so much from what it looked like in 1971, we are still reaping the benefits of that forward thinking. And that's one of the reasons why we believe that now is the moment to be thinking about the investments that are going to be paying off for the next 50 years and beyond. We know how much of our infrastructure, including our maritime infrastructure, needs repair and needs reimagination. As you know, we have a lot of existing federal programs that seek to invest in our ports and waterways, including our inland waterways. We have our Port Infrastructure Development Program, which offers grants to improve facilities at coastal seaports, inland river ports, and Great Lakes ports. And we recently made $230 million in funding available through this program. I want to note that it's out for applications and they're due by July 30th. And just a few months ago, we awarded nearly $20 million in grants to help 31 smaller shipyards grow and hire and become more competitive. So we're proud of the programming we have underway, but we know that we can and must do a lot more to fix and modernize our infrastructure. And that's why the president's vision for our infrastructure, the American Jobs Plan, invests an unprecedented $17 billion in our inland waterways, as well as coastal and land ports of entry and our ferries. This is a plan that can create millions of good paying jobs, including for longshore workers, shipyard workers, and merchant mariners. And because our infrastructure often affects surrounding communities, it's also important to note that it creates a healthy ports program, which can address air pollution in the neighborhoods near our ports, which are often home to communities of color, and can support the workers who are part of those ports. And of course, beyond maritime infrastructure, this is a vision to expand public transit, upgrade our airports, repair our roads and bridges, and so much more. Like the people of Little Rock, I come from a river city. I come from a community in Indiana that came into existence because of riverborne trade. Just last month, I was in Pittsburgh and saw bridges and locks and dams built half a century ago or longer, sometimes as part of the New Deal that communities still depend on. And as we mentioned earlier in Memphis, I just saw a bridge and a remarkable level of barge traffic passing under it, saw how much the communities depend on that resource. The infrastructure that supports our communities is absolutely essential to our economy. And we've been relying for too long on the investments that were made long before our time, which is why now's our turn to do the same. Now's our chance for a generational investment to position us to outcompete our rivals. These are investments that reflect a commitment to rebuilding and imagining our infrastructure for the next 50 years. And that's why I'm so pleased to be with you right now, acknowledging in multi-decade terms the sweep of our history and the power of great infrastructure resources. So again, happy 50th birthday, and I'm honored to be with you and looking forward to the panel.
So much, Mr. Secretary, again for joining us. We are grateful beyond words for your participation here today. Next member of the panel I would like to introduce is Mayor Frank Scott Jr. Mayor Scott began his career in public service by working for Governor Beebe for 5 years, and after going into the private sector where he became a community banker to help businesses get started and to grow, he continued even from the private sector his public interest involvement, where he served on the Arkansas Highway Commission, but also importantly on the board of directors of the Little Rock Port Authority. In 2018, he really made history when he became the first popularly elected black mayor of Little Rock. And since he's become mayor, he has set out to inspire the entire city with a message of unity. He wants to unify Little Rock, and he's uniquely positioned to be able to do that. As I've mentioned with Governor Hutchinson, he has really championed infrastructure in a way that, as former Mayor Buttigieg did when he was in South Bend, as a way that includes every piece of the community. And we're so grateful to have you here today, Mayor Scott.
Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for your leadership and advocacy. It's definitely a breath of fresh air to have a mayor that is the Secretary of Transportation, who uniquely understands the connection with transportation and economic development, and understands of what we need as cities to have greater economic development through that transportation key point. One of the things that we also know is you've been a stalwart as it relates to connecting cities to new investment. And we know whether it's the forthcoming infrastructure plan, the Americans Jobs Plan, as well as the American Infrastructure Plan, that you've been right in the middle of it. And so we want to continue to share our appreciation to you from that standpoint. As we recognize the 50-year anniversary, one of the things that we know 50 years ago, this was an economic connector. And as we focus on trade and transportation, we need to continue to foster another 50 years times 2 to do all that we can from this inland port perspective. As you know, Little Rock is a microcosm of the United States. We're both rural and urban at the same time. But one of the unique things that we have is that connection of river, rail, road, and now trails. And so with this multifacetedness of transportation, we know only through this partnership of Mcclellan Kerr we will continue to have greater economic development. So thank you again for your leadership and your advocacy.
Thank you so much for being here today, Mr. Mayor. The last member of the panel we have today is Port Authority Director Brian Day. Brian has worked in state and local government for over 35 years, started in the state parks, and then he worked for the city of Little Rock for over 20 years, where he was the director of our parks department here as part of the city of Little Rock, and he also worked in the city manager's office. He became head of the Little Rock Port in 2014, but he's been a good guy throughout, as a testament, especially in a local community, of why it's always good to be nice to everybody. Is he helped supervise a young punk teenage intern in the city manager's office over 20 years ago. And now, because he's in a position where that same person could ask him anything he wants in front of the media, the mayor, and the United States cabinet member. So just a good lesson for the future. Thank you for always being good to me, Brian. But with that, thank you so much for being here. And obviously, I want you to give your welcome remarks, opening remarks. But I also just want to start the discussion with you by saying, obviously, MCARD's such a huge part of Arkansas, Oklahoma, and the entire nation, as we've all said. At the time, it was the largest civil works project ever funded by Congress. So if you could launch into our discussion as part of your opening remarks about what exactly MCARNS has meant to Central Arkansas and to the entire region.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, Governor, thank you, Mayor, thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here today. Last Friday, we did rededicate the Mcclellan-Kerr Arkansas River Navigation System. It was dedicated 50 years ago, and today has an incredible impact on not only Arkansas and Oklahoma, but Kansas, eastern Colorado, northern Texas, southern Missouri. It plays a vital role in our transportation system, as well as many other elements that the governor mentioned. What I'd like to say, just to kind of, we'll jump into some questions, but I think about the Mcclellan-Kerr Navigation System project, and in my mind, it was the perfect infrastructure deal. It took several years to come together, but it crossed the political divide, and they built this navigation system that brought public and private investment today that exceeds billions and billions of dollars over the last 50 years. When the river system was built, the cities of Muskogee, Oklahoma, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Pine Bluff, Little Rock, and Fort Smith came together to build public ports. And that's what the infrastructure project did. It brought the communities together to create these economic development engines. In addition to the economic development aspects, as was mentioned earlier, it manages flood control, irrigation, environmental and wildlife habitat, recreation and tourism, and it built the community. For many years, communities turned their backs on the river, but when this system was built, communities embraced it. The economic impact it's not measurable. It's billions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of jobs, and untold benefits to communities that can't be measured, like the flood control I mentioned. I hope that in the future we can continue to build these game-changing, these benchmark infrastructure projects that will impact Middle America or all of America. And these types of projects have a huge impact on individuals, communities, jobs, and growth. So I look forward to this conversation, and I want to thank all the panelists for being with me today.
Thank you, Brian. Mr. Mayor, you want to visit a little bit about the impact that MCARNS has had on the Little Rock Port and a more local impact as we've had here in the city of Little Rock?
One of the things that we have to understand, having an inland port is a true asset to the state's capital city and what it does from a transportation perspective, but not only infrastructure and what it means with all the things that Mr. Day has already shared with us today. But when we think about economic development and we're able to sell assets to other companies that are thinking about coming to our city, they understand the water navigation and the water management aspect of it. And so this is something that we continue to sell as we sell Little Rock. But not only sell Little Rock, but we sell the state of Arkansas and all the various connections that we have with other cities, not only from an economic development standpoint, but also from local trade.
Mr. Secretary, I'm going to broaden it just a little bit. Obviously, if you want to visit about the impact of MCARNS, we want to hear that. But I'm also curious about your perspective on the view more broadly from the United States Department of Transportation about small and medium-sized ports, particularly along the inland waterways in the United States.
Well, we think it's critical to the American economy. I just pulled the last year that we have numbers for handy was 2019, and that year alone, 515 million tons of waterborne cargo transited America's inland waterways. And that, of course, is not possible without this network of ports. And I think especially in a season like this, where we're having this national conversation about the future of our infrastructure, it's important to make sure we have a broad imagination about where the opportunity lies and where the assets lie that we have counted on this whole time. Ports, when you even say the word, people often visualize major coastal ports, and of course those are critically important. But often it's actually in our smaller ports where if something weren't right, if something were interrupted or blocked or unavailable, you'd be feeling it most acutely in a lot of American communities. So we believe the need to invest in and support our smaller ports, especially in our inland waterways, can't be separated from the bigger picture of American waterborne transportation and American infrastructure writ large.
I appreciate it. My next question is really going to launch into what I know you're in the throes of right now every day, but when MCARNS was built, and Brian made reference to this in his opening remarks, you could almost describe it as the perfect investment for civil works in this part of the country. It created opportunities for commercial navigation irrigation for farmlands, flood control solutions, hydropower, environmental improvements, and tourism. It really impacted across the board this part of the country. What will it take for America to invest in these kinds of projects again?
Well, I think it's up to us. I mean, we've got to decide whether or not we are content to continue to benefit only from previous generations of courage and ingenuity, or whether we're ready to make certain that 50 years from now, people can gather and marvel at what we did here in the early 2020s to make sure that America was going to win the future. Often the nature of a great piece of infrastructure is that it's so woven into our national or regional or local life that you scarcely notice that it's there. And paradoxically, good infrastructure is designed to be taken for granted, because the better it works, the more you're able to concentrate on the things that matter in your day-to-day life, your family, your enterprise, your faith, your scholarship, whatever it is that gives somebody meaning in their own life. Rests on the ability to take these resources for granted. But of course, we who are in positions of responsibility, whether we're talking about civic leaders or transportation policymakers, public policymakers or community advocates, need to be very active about not taking for granted the work, yes, the dollars and the resources, but also simply the cooperation and the intention that has to go into preparing for the future, and doing it in a way that responds to the challenges of the moment. So you take something like inland waterways and riverborne trade, and it sounds, certainly very traditional, almost so much so as to seem quaint. And yet you've got a manifestly 21st century challenge on our hands in the form of dealing with climate emissions. And if you stop and add those two things up, you realize, you see at the moment, you see the number of barges that can move along a river at the same time, that the more cargo traffic we can get onto a waterway rather than on a roadway, the more efficient it's going to be, the less emissions there are going to be. And the more we are using this most traditional and in some ways seemingly old-fashioned modes of transportation to deal with what is really the challenge of the future, and what's going to decide by the 2050s whether we will have succeeded or failed as a generation of policymakers. Those are the kinds of things that I think are at stake in us summoning the will right now, across party lines, across the local, state, federal divide, and really across the country, to come together and deliver in a big way on things like the $17 billion in commitments to ports that we're hoping to get through in this package.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mayor, Brian, from a state and local perspective, we had MCARN's this massive investment, which really perfectly met the needs of our country and its people. From a state and local level, what can we do right now in addition to what the Secretary's talking about to meet the needs of today and the future? And bear in mind, just go ahead and lay it on the state if you need to. You've got one state senator here. You've got the two legislators who both do a wonderful job representing the port in the legislature, Senator Linda Chesterfield and Representative Denise Ennet. You also have our county elected administrator here, County Judge Barry Hyde. So if you need to, tell us what we need to hear. What do state and local leaders need to do to meet the infrastructure investment demands of today and for the future? Mr. Mayor, we'll start with you.
Well, I think first and foremost, we have a great delegation here in Little Rock and Pulaski County that truly gets that infrastructure truly is the foundation of economic development. I think what we have to continue to do is to work with the Secretary to demonstrate that many people have to understand that we may take it for granted the infrastructure is needed. It's not only needed, but it connects to the economy, and we have to demonstrate and show, not tell, but show how that impacts all people, how it impacts our city, how it impacts our state. So we give the Secretary more ammunition as he's working across the party lines to ensure that we have a true infrastructure package, because that's what's best for our nation, that's what's best for our state, that's what's best for the city of Little Rock. We understand that here in Arkansas. That's the reason why we've been fully supportive of infrastructure development. We want to continue to do that as we move forward.
And I think I would build on what the mayor and the secretary have said. I think infrastructure, at least at the local level, we need to tell our story. When the MCARNS was built 50 years ago, Congress appropriated a little over $1 billion. That's billion with a B. It's not a lot of money today, but that $1 billion went a long way. It built 455 miles of navigable river, 18 locks and dams. Today, I don't know what the impact is in Tulsa or Muskogee or Fort Smith or Pine Bluff or all these other communities, but I can tell you that $1 billion investment 50 years ago equates to about $1.5 billion worth of return to Central Arkansas every 3 to 5 years. That's a good return on your investment, and I think those are the stories we have to tell. The secretary talked about barge traffic being clean and sustainable. The tonnage on the Arkansas River alone takes about 500,000 semis off the road every year. Think about putting 500,000 semis across the I-40 bridge right now. That would happen if we didn't have the navigation system. So I think as we go out and we talk about infrastructure, Senator, and we talk about those game-changing projects in the future, we just have to tell the story of the projects that worked. The federal government supported the interstate highway system, and look at what that has meant to communities all across America. Safe and effective transportation, job growth, development. Think if we could do that on the inland river system, the waterways. Those kind of investments from federal infrastructure will have a huge return on local communities. And I think when the public understands that, if we tell the story, they're going to be inclined to support those efforts.
You mentioned highways as opposed to rivers, and we've all referenced so far here today the I-40 bridge connecting Arkansas and Tennessee is closed down. At the moment when it first closed, not only were they not allowing cars across it, they also were not allowing barges to pass underneath it. So while the trucks and cars could go a few miles south of I-55 and maybe wait an extra hour or two to cross the river, there was no other river for those barges to take. To me, it highlighted the importance of the inland waterway system. Obviously, the Mississippi River is a major artery for the United States. So is the Arkansas River, and there are a lot of rivers that play such, not just a critical role, but a role that's really irreplaceable. Brian, I'm going to come back to you in a minute. I'm not going to put you on the spot. I'm going to give you a couple minutes to think about it while I ask the secretary a question. You talked about telling our story. So what I want you to do after I ask the secretary this question is give us a few examples of some success stories that really highlight the vision on the front end and the follow through on the back end of what the success of MCARNS has meant here for Central Arkansas. In the meantime, Mr. Secretary, I'm going to ask you, in your opening remarks, you made reference to some grant programs with some upcoming application deadlines. Can you give us a little more detail and information, about what are those investment opportunities with DOT, and how do inland waterway ports and associated stakeholders, what's the best way to approach the department to get some of the grant funding?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier the Port Infrastructure Development Program. That's just one of the ways that we're supporting local communities, states, and port authorities and others seeking either to maintain and manage or to modernize and extend infrastructure. Let me mention another one, which is the America's Marine Highway Program. That's administered by the department and has an upcoming deadline too, actually June 25th. And we've got a notice of funding opportunity out right now for proposals for that program. There's also the infra grant program and build grants, which are now going to be called RAISE grants. There seems to be a requirement that the acronym change every few years. Some might even know it as a Tiger grant. But the point is there are a lot of discretionary resources that are available when there is a vision on how to create the things that are our policy goals, economic strength, as well as increasing sustainability and equity across our regions. I should also mention that we have a gateway office in Paducah, Kentucky, where Chad Dorsey would be the point of contact covering Arkansas in our Maritime Administration. Again, I think when people think of where the U.S. Maritime Administration would be, they might not think about the interior of the country. But again, knowing the importance of these inland waterways, we do have an office that is responsive to Arkansas and eager and happy to help discuss ideas or navigate the system. And one of the things I found as mayor of a small, mid-sized U.S. city was that often in trying to get federal resources or federal help, I was sometimes competing with communities that were big enough to have full-time staffed offices in Washington, D.C., and we sure didn't. So it's very important to us as a department that smaller communities and places that are maybe not the top 10 cities in the U.S. Have just as good access to our federal agency. We want to be as user-friendly as possible and really eager to get more information out about our grant opportunities and what that might mean, whether it's specific to things on and around the MCARN system or more broadly in the region.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. All right, Brian, I'm kicking it back over to you. Give us some of those success stories.
I will. Mr. Secretary, I do want to say that Mr. Dorsey's been very helpful and very responsive, as has your whole team. We were fortunate enough to get a Tiger grant in 2016, and that office has been amazing and incredible to work with. So you've got a great team, and I applaud them for their efforts. So the success story. Well, let me we'll jump back a few years. So for anybody that grew up in Arkansas pre-1969, when the locks and dams were finished in this part of the river, you can remember that you could walk across the Arkansas River in the summer, and in the winter and the springs it flooded and it breached lands and farmlands and caused a lot of damage. When the system was built and being built, the City of Little Rock City Board of Directors at the time said, you know what, we need a port. And someone put their finger on a map and said, we're going to put it out here and where we are today. And if you think about what that land looked like 50 years ago, Interstate 440 didn't exist. College Station neighborhood was just being developed. The Bill and Hillary Clinton Airport was Adams Field. There just wasn't a whole lot out there. But the city came together. The citizens invested $1 million in the port. We bought some land. We built a dock. And we kind of waited for the jobs and the investment to come. Today, and it's been mentioned, you know, we're nearing 4,000 acres in size. We'll soon have 7,000 people coming to the port every day to make a living. We know they come from 23 counties. That's about a third of the state. We know the majority of the jobs come from Pulaski County and Little Rock, and we're supporting those growths. But we have a couple of major companies that chose the Port of Little Rock because of the river, because of the railroad infrastructure and the interstate system. And one of those is Wellspun. Wellspun's an Indian company that focuses on steel fabrication. They could have made their product anywhere in the world, but they chose Little Rock because of the MCARNs. They're able to bring up those steel coils up the river, fabricate them into pipe, and ship them out by rail all over the country and to other countries as well. We have another user of the river that's based in Conway. They're one of our largest users, but they bring their product from South Korea and South America. They come up the river, we put it on truck, and we ship it to them. There's no way they could do that without the MCARN system. And then finally, if you live south of Little Rock, south of Arkansas, there's not a lot of rock, and we know that there's a lot of levee work and core work in Louisiana and Mississippi. We send a lot of aggregate and granite down the river on our barges. None of those things would have been possible without the MCARN's investment. And I think you have to look at the whole infrastructure system, the railroad system, the river system, the interstate system, and even our airport provide part of the supply chain. But those successes, Senator, 50 years ago, there was a farm. People were raising goats and cattle out there. Today, it's home to 7,000 employees making livable wages, returning those taxes and spending those funds in local communities. And that's the success story that needs to be told.
That's awesome. Thank you, Brian. All right. I know we're getting near the end of our time. I want to get one more question in before I give each of you a chance to close out. Just taking even one more step back. On the global stage, our infrastructure here in the United States, at least in the current day, doesn't always get the best grades. And obviously we've talked this entire time about improving our infrastructure, but even from that, taking that one step back, what is the most important thing we can do, whether it's the public, government, private sector, whatever the case may be, from your perspective, that we can do to make sure that our infrastructure locally and nationwide is not only maintained but expanded for the future as we move forward? Mr. Secretary?
Well, I think part of it is things like the conversation we're having right now. You know, it is important for public and private to stand together and discuss why we depend on our infrastructure and how we can take it to the next level. We also have to recognize that we are slipping. As you said, we get these letter grades from the civil engineers nationwide. Overall, we're in C- territory. Even more concerning are the league tables, the rankings, if you will, where we have slipped out of the top 10. And one of the reasons you see such a sense of urgency, one of the reasons you see the president insisting that we do something big and that we do it now, is that we can't go to all this trouble of negotiating an infrastructure package just for the purpose of remaining in 13th place. We've got to actually vault back ahead. And so I'd say the single most important thing is to set our vision on the long term. Immediate action that we have to do right now, in this moment, in this year, but also doing it with a view toward what we're going to need for the next 50 years. Just as people had the vision, as Brian was saying, to look at a farm, to look at a not yet fully developed airfield, to look at what the regional economy looked like then, and see how it could develop if only it were better connected. And it takes a measure of faith as well as a measure of foresight, the readiness to know that when you make a good public investment, private value is unlocked by that. The private dollars follow those good public choices, which is one of the reasons why infrastructure has always had one of the greatest returns on investment, some of the best bang for your buck of any kind of public investment you could make. Now, frankly, I've often seen cities and communities, counties, and states already stepping up, sometimes making painful decisions to raise revenue to get it done. Now we got to make sure that the federal government is doing our part too. And the more that we can lift up these specific stories, like what MCARNS represents, to remind people of the power of good infrastructure investment, the more we can do what really needs to happen, which is not even to convince the American people of the need to make a generational infrastructure investment. The American people are already there. We just got to make sure that that Washington catches up to where the American people are. And that's a matter of telling these stories and laying out these visions, what needs fixing and what new assets we need to put in place so that we really can win the future as a country.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Mayor, Brian, take it from there.
One of the things I want to say as we reflect on these 50 years and we celebrate at the same time, it just didn't happen. It took the point of planning and perseverance, but also a purpose that the citizens of Little Rock and the region of Central Arkansas had to have the Mcclellan Kerr navigational system and what it does to connect people and product across this entire nation. We have to have that same fervor about ourselves as we rebuild our city, as we rebuild our region, and focusing more on infrastructure development, understanding what it does for trade development and what it also does for a sustainable economy. And that's what will take us to another 50 years as we restore coming out of a pandemic.
Brian?
And I think the Secretary said it best. You know, we need an aggressive infrastructure plan, but we also have to take care of what we have. We've seen that with the 40 bridge. On the MCARN system, we know there's several $100 million worth of critical needs in those locks and dams. We heard the governor talk about the 12-foot channel to make us more competitive. There's a project known as the Three Rivers Project at the mouth of the river. The president's budget this year has been very kind to the MCARN system, but we can't lose sight of taking care of what we have. We also can't lose sight of creating those game-changing, those innovative, those progressive infrastructure projects that bring that public-private investment, that create opportunity, that bring people together and connect people, as the mayor said. And I think if we keep telling this story, we'll eventually get there.
Okay, I think we're close to wrapping up. I want to give each one of our panelists an opportunity just to say some closing remarks. And again, we'll start with you, Mr. Secretary.
Well, Senator, thanks again for the invitation to join. It's one thing out here to talk in abstract terms about infrastructure. It's another to be sharing some time with you and hearing very specifically about what it means to a community and really a whole region to have a great infrastructure resource. It's a real wind in my sails as we maintain the energy to keep delivering, both in terms of the programs that we have and in terms of what might be possible if Washington is prepared to hear the communities around the country and step up. I appreciate the chance to be with each of the panelists today. Mayor, I know how much you were doing to benefit the community of Little Rock, and I so admire the way that you and members of the community of U.S. mayors have risen to the challenge before us. And, Brian, I think it's fitting that you come from the world of parks, because I think part of the experience of managing maybe we'll call it the green infrastructure of our communities is to see how the right kind of public asset can unlock so much by way of quality of life, well-being, everything from economic growth to public health, just as is true with a piece of so-called hard infrastructure like what MCARNS represents. So I really appreciate the spirit of collaboration, the stewardship and the vision that you all bring to the management of the assets that matter for your local economy and the families that it supports. And looking forward to future visits in person, I hope, as well as virtual. And thankful again for the chance to join you today.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. As you were very gracious to mention, I was an ambassador for Arkansas a while back, and I think the only time that we've managed to pull you to Little Rock was for my wedding 14 years ago. And
That's right.
I'll make a commitment right now to bring you back at some point as soon as we can, especially when people can travel more freely than they can just yet today. I'm afraid that when you come back this time, there's going to be one or two more people who are interested in seeing you while you're here, because now the entire country has seen what I saw over 20 years ago, which is a truly transformational figure, and we're so grateful to you for being here with us today and for your service to our country. Thank you. Thank you, Pete. Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Secretary, we just want to share our appreciation to you and carving out time and making time for the city of Little Rock and the state of Arkansas. We know the many challenges that you have ahead, and we understand that time is valuable, and just for you to share that time with us, we want you to know how much we appreciate you. Little Rock stands ready to support you, President Biden's infrastructure plan, and we also want to take advantage of those dollars that you have available.
Senator Tucker, Mayor, Mr. Secretary, thanks for joining me today. I just would say that as the country has this infrastructure conversation, that not to lose sight of that infrastructure equals jobs. And we know that if we have good infrastructure projects, we're creating contemporary jobs for construction, design, planning, but we also know, and we've seen it with the MCARN system, that they create long-standing, good-paying jobs and support the country. And hopefully that we'll come together and figure those issues out so that we can continue to invest in innovative and progressive infrastructure and taking care of what we have. Mr. Secretary, we'd love to have you come to Little Rock and tour the port and tour the MCARN system, and we stand ready to help you any way we can. And I want to thank all of you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Brian, and thank you so much, Mr. Mayor, for the inspirational work that y'all do here locally, and thank you so much for being here with us today. As we've said, it's really impossible to overstate the impact of the MCARN system here locally in Arkansas, but really throughout the entire country. We know the time is now to act, to invest in our infrastructure for the future, and we're so grateful to have local leaders like Mayor Scott and Brian Day, and also leaders on the national scale like Secretary Buttigieg to help lead us there. So thank you so much for being with us today.